Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. A few days ago Eurogamer posted an interview they had with the CEO of Electronic Arts Andrew Wilson and DICE General Manager Carl Magnus Trotzen. The topic was the horrible condition Battlefield 4 was in on release and during the first few months. It was not before February when the game finally started to work more like a final version than a beta. Now in that interview they pushed all the right buttons. They said that they learned a lot from that disaster and that it led to fundamental changes in the way EA and their studios are creating games. Also the people at DICE took the bad state in which Battlefield 4 was released very personal and worked very hard to resolve the issues. In the future, Wilson said, they will give the studios more time to develop their games. And the studios will have to reach the final state earlier to have enough time to find and fix the bugs before the game is released. And there will be earlier betas, like we have seen with Hardline. So they are now taking the steps which we asked them to do since before Battlefield 3 was announced. A lot of people seem to feel very relieved because of what has been said in this interview. But can we really celebrate already? The timing of this interview is a bit convenient, isn't it? EA announced a new game for a franchise that has suffered from a ton of problems and even lawsuits were filed by the investors. And now just a few weeks after the official announcement of Hardline, you see an interview like this, where they claim that everything will be done differently now, and that they are not going to repeat the mistakes which they made for Battlefield 4 and previous titles. But when you think back a bit, then we heard this before. In example, 1 month before Battlefield 3 was released, there was an interview with producer Patrick Bach, who said that he is so ashamed of Bad Company 2, he can't even bring himself to start it up. And Battlefield 3 will be so much better and larger. And to be honest, I never understood why he said that. Yes, the PC version of Bad Company 2 was a direct console port. But it was still a quite solid title, a quite fun game, which I spent a lot of time with. Then the Battlefield 3 beta came out, which only included Metro in the Rush game mode for the public and Caspian Border in Conquest for the press. And it was suffering from a ton of issues. Many issues which we already knew from Bad Company 2. But DICE tried to calm down the community by telling them that the build was very old due to console certification. And most of the issues we see there are already fixed in the current state of the game, and the final will be good. Yet the final also turned out to be a bug-infested disaster. But for some reason many players seem to have forgotten that by now. The netcode was also in just an unplayable state for the first few months, until DICE eventually got it into the state it is in now. Which is still very bad. Then Battlefield 4 was announced, and again DICE producers started to say that they were not happy with a lot of things they did in Battlefield 3, especially the issues at launch, and that Battlefield 4 would do such a better job. Netcode was a hot topic, and DICE employees said many times in interviews that they heavily reworked, tweaked and optimized it. So everyone playing Battlefield 4 would notice that it is better than Battlefield 3. The beta for Battlefield 4 also had a ton of issues. But just like with the Battlefield 3 beta, DICE said that we don't need to worry. They already fixed most of the issues and on release it will all be fine. But what we got was an utter train wreck. Netcode was worse than what Battlefield 3 had at this point. Maybe even worse than what it was like on release. We had client crashes, server crashes, complete sound loss, etc. So an interview like this one from Eurogamer, so close after EA showed us a new Battlefield title, where everyone feels guilty about the issues of the last game, is nothing new for us. Now let's have a look at a few of the things that have been said in this interview. Development cycles will become longer, so there is more time between final and launch to get a lot more testing on the game. During the entire development process, the requirement for stability of the builds will be higher. We will see betas earlier to get more real-life testing done. So all this is done to avoid having the issues again which we just recently had in Battlefield 4. And I can't argue with that. The only issue I have with this statement is that they will only start to do that now. This is how professional software development is done for ages, especially if you call your product to be a AAA quality title. You have to aim for stability during the development process. You need to have a development cycle that is long enough so that you can actually develop a quality product. So why do they try to sell us this as some new solution? This is how all of EA's games should have been developed like in the past. But let's just be happy that EA finally found out how not to develop games. Dan Wilson also said that DICE had a lot of time for Battlefield 4 and that EA did not force it out of the door. He also said that DICE just tried to push too much into Battlefield 4. And at this point it feels that EA wants to load all the blame on DICE. No one seriously believes that EA did not force Battlefield 4 on the market. They have done the exact same thing with Battlefield 3 and Medal of Honor Warfighter. These games had to be released 14 days before Call of Duty, no matter what. Now, despite what many people posted in the forums and comments, the people creating these games are not stupid. The studios and the testers knew about the issues these games had. They knew about their unfinished state. But to delay the release was no option for EA. Now this does not mean that DICE is completely innocent. They knew that the development time frame they had. And they added new features constantly, even in the final phase of development. DICE had very bad release management and planning for both Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. They should have used the little time they had more wisely and prioritized the core gameplay features over eye-candy trailer material features. But still, EA can't just put all the blame on DICE. Or any other studio which launches their title in an unfinished state, because EA has a history of pushing out unfinished games. So the very early Hardline beta should be the first sign of that new development policy EA has put in place for its games and studios. In comparison, DICE had 2 years to develop Battlefield 4. In that time they created the single player and the multiplayer, as well as introduced the Commander, the Spectator feature, Networked Water Simulation, Levolution, the battle screen and more. So yes, the game was a train wreck at release, because they did too much in those 2 years. 6 months more and the game would have been in a much better state. Visceral has a 3-year development time frame for Hardline, while DICE had just 2 years. This is the extended development time frame Wilson talked about. But when you played the Hardline beta, you wonder what they did in those 3 years. It does not have a single new feature that is as massive as what I just mentioned for Battlefield 4. It has the exact same outdated 30Hz netcode. It has the exact same HUD. It uses exactly the same art style. So what did they do in those 3 years? It looks like Visceral was handed over the Battlefield 4 source code when it was in its alpha state, and then they started to modify the game into what we now know as Hardline. All the heavy lifting in form of the bug fixes and the optimizations Battlefield 4 has seen were done by DICE and then integrated into Hardline by Visceral. The netcode update of the Hardline beta was done by DICE LA. And all the following changes DICE LA will do for Battlefield 4 will also be added to Hardline. But what does it even mean when someone says that something has been in development for 3 years? It does not mean that 100 people were working on it for that time. You always start with a very small group of people, which does prototypes, designs, and someone has to write the story for the single player. Maybe that single player will be over 15 hours long and blow our minds. But if it is also just a forgettable 4-hour experience, then what the hell did Visual do in those 3 years they have been working on Hardline? If Hardline is any good and worth its price, we will see soon enough. It's only a few more months. Another point in the interview was if the release of Hardline means that the Battlefield franchise got annualized. They say no. I say I'm surprised that it took them so long, as they are obviously competing with other first-person shooters that do exact the same thing very successfully. And that's not even necessarily a bad thing, to get a new Battlefield title every year, if it's done right. Think about Battlefield 4 released 2013, 2014 Hardline, 2015 Bad Company 3, 2016 Battlefield 5 and so on. So as long as each of these games gets its full 3-year development cycle, 4 years of support, which means patches and content, and if each of these games does not feel like a total conversion mod of the game that was released a year before, then I would not have a problem with that. But when I look at the Hardline beta, then EA is still far away from that. So if you ask me, you should be very skeptical about this and similar interviews that are done after the game has been announced and during the pre-release stage, where the hype train is rolling. Because a lot of what has been said here is what we keep hearing for years now from EA and its different studios about their different franchises. What they say all sounds good, but they now have to prove that these are not just words. They have to prove that they really are determined to dramatically increase the quality of their products. The Battlefield CTE, which is ran by DICE LA, is such a sign, where you see action and not just words. So I hope that this continues, not just in the Battlefield franchise, but also in the other franchises out there. Gaming is an expensive hobby. $60 or $120 with premium or a season pass is a lot of money. And for that money we are entitled to get finished and polished games. We have the power to make the publishers and the studios change. All we have to do is keep our wallet closed until we are sure that AAA is not only written on the cover and rushed reviews, but that the game actually is of AAA quality. Never pre-order a game. If you give them your hard-earned money based on trailers and betas, you tell them that what you see is good enough. So why should they push to do even better than that? They already got your money. Keep your wallets closed, never buy a game because you see some PR material. Wait for reviews from sources you can trust. It's up to every single one of us if we get quality for our money or if we get a rushed beta. If you want to reach me, you can do so on Twitter and by email. The links are in the description. Please consider to hit the subscribe button if you like my content, and I will hopefully see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris and this was Battle Nonsense.